figure out how to live alongside?
I think that's the thing. So, in fact, under the Obama administration, there was a big research. There was a policy thing called preparing. I mean, they basically made a big research guidance as well as a social policy document, and it was titled, I think, very appropriately, "Preparing for a Future with AI." Okay, and this is one of the things that will happen. There are many, many other things. I mean, in fact, there are all sorts of ways. Fakes are one big way, and fakes of all types: deep fakes, voice deep fakes, and mental deep fakes. They're all what I call head fakes. They're certainly one important issue, but again, there are also all these other synthetic, beneficial uses. Like, for example, already, right? I'm sure we grew up thinking interviews would be face to face. We are doing it, on the airwaves, right? And we got adapted to that. And every day when I see like a news hour on PBS or any of these news things, and everybody is in their own places, they all have, different backgrounds. It's no longer this one standardized studio background. So oftentimes, you look at what's in their background, what are the books they're reading, sort of thing. So we got used to these sorts of realities already because of these technologies being available. When synthetic reality technology becomes available, so one of the interesting things, let's say you could have a mind twin secretary, which essentially represents you, right? I mean, like there's this whole issue of power of attorney, which is this legal concept where you give somebody your power of attorney, so then they sort of represent you. Everybody knows that they are representing you, but they don't look like you, right? But now you can send your AI mind twin, to represent you, and it looks like you too, and it talks like you too. Now the only worry is, of course, what if it is only talking to the other people's mind twins? That is actually very much possible, and these are all the kinds of things we may very well get used to. And one of the strange things is, it's like as Alan Kay said, preparing for the future partly involves inventing that future ourselves, because it's extremely hard to, and then sort of see how it pans out, because it's extremely hard to actually see how things change. One of my favorite examples that I tell people is, if you think of the movie Blade Runner, the original one, which is like way, way ahead of its time, right? If you see it now, not when it came out, it obviously looked very futuristic. Even now, it looks very, very futuristic in many different ways. They had flying cars, they had this, that, that, etc. And yet, they had TVs which looked like huge bricks. They had phones which looked like huge bricks. They had computers which looked like huge, desk drawers kind of a thing. So the interesting thing is, we are constrained by our imagination. There's a beautiful set of pictures that are available, like paintings that are available, of people drawing how they think 2020 will look like sitting in 1900s, or 1990 would look like sitting in 1900s. And it's very cute when we look at it, because they will think some things will change. They might have the same old, like a horse carriage, except it has some funny wings, kind of a thing. But that's, in some sense, we don't even know what to imagine, because we essentially change our own imagination. The beauty about human civilization is we invent the world we live in, and until we invent it, we don't see the next level of imagination. So it is indeed true, with respect to your first question, that these are all things, these are small steps in terms of us getting to live with technology. But I won't even say this suddenly it's something, there's a quantum leap between normal technology versus AI technology. To me, essentially, all of these are of a whole cloth. All technologies of a whole cloth. To put this in perspective, the deep fakes became possible because AI technologies became good at doing perceptual intelligence tasks. Perceptual intelligence is the thing that kids do the first. They look at their mother's face, they smile, they look at their dad's face, they smile, or whatever. That's the thing they learn first. Then they do emotions, they do social graces, And then they will start learning chess or taking SATs. In the case of AI, it actually went the complete opposite way. AI systems were essentially able to play chess and defeat Kasparov back in 90s. But while they were playing chess, they couldn't recognize one chess piece from other chess piece. They just basically have a mental idea that put this piece in this thing, and an actual human person will make the physical move. None of us think the hardest part of chess is moving the piece. We all think the hardest part of chess is thinking about what the next move is. And yet actually AI systems did the thinking easy. They couldn't do the perception. And it was a big problem for the longest time. AI has been around for 60 years. And we only started doing the perception that kids do like in last 10 or so years. And part of the reason it turns out is because we could program computers to do tasks that if we know how to do those tasks. This is explicit knowledge. We have rules of chess. There is explicit ways of figuring out what is a good move for chess. It just takes longer time to look at all the combinatorics, so computers will help with the speed. We could do this for explicit tasks. But tasks, there are many tasks that we do, like vision, looking at a picture, looking at like a letter and realizing without thinking, oh, this is T, this is I, or this is and reading an entire page without even realizing what the letters are, for example. We just do this subconsciously, right? This, we couldn't program computers because we didn't know how we were doing it. Okay, so what we had to do then, we had to wait to make them learn the same way we learned, which is just by watching. Okay, the interesting thing is to watch, there should be a lot of images available for the computer, a lot of videos available for the computer. So you know what is the real driver of AI technology? Cell phones. When iPhone came along, everybody has a phone with a camera in it. I don't know how you use your cell phone, but I use it to mostly take pictures and then put it on the Twitter, right? Or something or other. But all of a sudden, in computer vision, for example, for the longest time, they would have just a few actual digitized pictures that they'll all use as the benchmark to test their examples, etc. With this, suddenly everything in the world is being digitally captured and put on the web, and that can then be used to train these systems. So imagine people who are only thinking of solving the perceptual intelligence problem and basically coming up with better and better algorithms without thinking about what else happens in the world. They would basically not necessarily realize that the world changes all directions are changing at the same time. And what happens in one direction, such as something like a cell phone, which has really nothing to do with AI, winds up becoming a huge driver for AI, which then helps the cell phone technology now. Which, do you see what I'm saying? So that's the thing that sort of happens in the way these things grow, essentially. So you don't know, just basically you don't realize. That's the same thing in Blade Runner, right? Basically, they didn't realize how all directions will evolve. They just focused on a couple of directions, such as maybe there'll be flying cars, but they didn't think about, maybe there will also be flat screen TVs, or the TV, basically not even flat screen TVs, you can just have augmented reality TVs. They couldn't imagine that at that time. And yet, like here we are. And so, in fact, one other analogy for this is essentially many of these tacit knowledge tasks, being able to do something without thinking, this is very important for us. But being able to think about a new thing is also equally important for us. The first time a problem is presented, you want to be able to think for the solution. That 1500th time that same problem is presented, like when you were a kid, if somebody asks you what is 14 plus 17, probably you had to actually add them. As you get used to the numbers, if you're still doing it, you'll be a very slow person. So what happens then is you just sort of reflexively tell the answer. And there is this theory that one way of qualitatively understanding human brains is system 2 versus system 1. System 1 essentially looks at the world and makes snap judgments. System 2 tries to do deliberative thinking. And all of it, the intelligence is both system 1 and system 2. And the way we really differ from the rest of the universe in terms of the intelligence is we have system 2, not just system 1. You know, animals can, dogs can see world, you know, much, but dogs have much keener sense of smell than you and I do. And some other animals can see under dark much better than you and I can do, right? That's all system 1. What they miss is system 2. And what we can do essentially is basically the perceptual technology has been waiting, you know, for this training, that system 1 training, which essentially only by examples. But we also learn by just being told. That is like the system 2 level. And, you know, bringing those two together ultimately is the full human intelligence. The current deepfakes are at the system 1 level, essentially.
Do you think they will get beyond that?
I believe so. At least my research. I'm not trying to make deep fakes, but my point is that being human is having both system 2 and system 1. You see what I'm saying? You should be able to deal with. So like when you start driving in the beginning, you're very careful. After a while, you don't even know. I mean, oftentimes it happens to you. Oh my God, I don't even remember actually making that turn and I still reached my home. And sometimes very unsettling because essentially it became, you know, compiled into our, you know, sensing apparatus while, you know, the big brain basically was doing some other conscious reasoning. So this system 2 is consciously aware. You are aware of what system 2 is doing consciously. System 1 you are not consciously aware of. And being human is both. Because if you're only prepared for a particular environment, which is essentially system 1, then when the problem changes, you are flummoxed. So what we really need to do when the problem changes the first time around, you still need to be able to solve the problem. And then the 17th time, you should be able to compile it down into system 1. And that's full human intelligence. And, you know, systems are actually, that's combining both. So in fact, one of the strangest things technically in AI is we have very good way of approximating system 2. You know, in fact, much of AI before recent 2020, the last 10 years or so, was system 2 AI. It was essentially saying, if you were to provide the following logical descriptions of the problem, how would you be able to find the solution? So I'll tell you the rules of chess, I'll tell you the chessboard configuration, you tell me what the move is, you the AI system. You don't need to see, you don't need to visualize the chess, you know, the pieces, you don't need to grasp them. All of these are important for being a human, but that was something that AI systems were doing. System 2 AI is what was available for quite a while. System 1 AI is what is available now. You would think once after system 2, system 1 comes, they should be combined. Turns out technically they are not yet compatible. And some of the biggest open questions in AI as a field is how to combine both these advantages. The ability to learn from raw data while at the same time being able to take high-level advice, which you do. You know, you're looking at me, you are kind of making sense of what, you know, the voice signals, you know, visual signals, etc. But you're also able to kind of get conceptual information from me, you know, in a sort of a symbolic fashion because the language is sort of symbolic. And combining both is like a big issue. When we are able to combine them, then you will get to a point. So for example, connecting it back to GPT-3, you can, right now it will make a story that looks like a story. It has no goal. Pieces may not connect well to each other. There are, you know, you need to do a bunch of cherry picking. So in fact, I don't know if you have not played with it, there are, you know, places where you can give a prompt to GPT-3 and it'll make a story. Just as you can also make new faces up in some other websites. The stories that it comes up with, of the 100 stories, maybe one might be fine. There may be, all the others will start having all sorts of different issues. It's English, but it's not coherent. It's not, there is no actual point it is trying to make. It's inconsistent with common sense that we all have, etc., etc. That's because it's sort of like kids, again, do this. When kids basically come into the world with system 1 and sort of improve their system 2. So kids dabbling is the cutest thing because they tell these stories which make no sense and yet they syntactically making sense. They have the grammatical structure, they have people. It's just they don't have any connection to what we would consider as a reasonable attempt at representing reality. Do you see what I mean? The coherence of the story, etc. So we don't have that in GPT-3. And that is what is being currently used to sort of change people's minds, for example. Imagine if I can have GPT-3, which also is told that, okay, this person likes this particular politician, they also believe in the following things. Tell them this same story for that person, and you'll write a new story now. And that is combining both aspects, system 1 and system 2. Yeah. At that point, then you will have a lot more. We do this. You and I do this, right? So, and so when we get to that, again, I think AI as a field is really getting to general human intelligence. But so one of the things that bothers us in the field is everybody looks at any specific improvement in AI and thinks this is it. This is all like the robots are going to kill us, sort of a thing. But again, stupid intelligence exists already. Stupid autonomy exists already. We can be killed by autonomous, we can be killed by thermonuclear weapons, which have no brain whatsoever. But the issue is intelligence itself is much more variegated, and getting all of it will be useful for both beneficial purpose. That's when I will say we have human level intelligence. And when you have human level intelligence working on your behalf, you can use it for good. Then of course use it for bad too.
Wow.
Okay.
That is great. We covered a lot of ground. This is really, really, really good. Like I'm going to be using too much of this, I think. Too much of this interview. But yeah, I think, this was great.
Okay.
You're a great interviewer. You're a great interviewee.
Good.
Is there any last things that you want to touch on, or any questions or things that we didn't hit?
Yeah, I was looking at your questions. I'm trying to remember if there's anything. There were some things, I think when we talked earlier, I realized that many of these questions are, honestly, remember I told you that I decided to talk to you because of your questions, because they show a lot of thought. I think it's many of them are very much on point that many people don't quite realize. And in fact, I had written yes for some of these things, right? For example, right? Because it's like yes in big letters that, so one, maybe I'll just say those and may or may not be useful when we talk to things already.
Absolutely.
One question you had was, is the progress of deepfake technology outpacing detection? Yes, of course, that was a much simpler scenario. That's why eventually we'll get to a point we need to live with, synthetic reality surrounding us. But we did cover that. A second question you asked is actually an interesting thing about deepfakes themselves. While deepfake coverage in the media has predominantly centered around their potential to undermine democracy and target political candidates, are deepfakes more detrimental to private citizens and businesses that don't have national platforms and PR teams to cushion the blow? Actually, that's a very interesting point. Making one more Trump deepfake video, Obama deepfake video, is not really going to cause much damage. Everybody already has decided what they think Obama is for, what Trump is for. Plus, the entire national media organization is going to spend their time trying to check the veracity of a video of these. Even in democracy, think of like Arizona 12th district state house election, or like Tempe High School Union board member election, which basically are bedrock of democracy, but nobody is going to spend time checking the veracity. So the bar for affecting these elections is much lower. So even a grainy-ish video which full of inconsistencies is likely to affect the outcome, because people don't quite know, who these candidates are. That's one of the very interesting things. And so that's the same idea that, take into the conclusion is private citizens can have pretty big problems with deepfakes being weaponized against them. These are the spearfish attacks, for example. First of all, or they could be like you being put in a compromising video and essentially being told that unless you pay, then this video will be on YouTube or something of that kind. This is already, there are the subgenres like revenge porn, etc., that people have been doing this, and that is in fact quite an unfortunate issue that we do need to worry about. So it's like you can do much bigger damage on small parts of the population because the defense is going to be much less there because there is no entire national organization going on. So I think that is a very interesting question that you had. There was another one that I'm just trying to. There was this other one that you said. I don't know where it is, but it's actually a lovely question too, which is the fact that deepfakes exist can be used by people to say that reality is fake. We live in this damn world right now. Our politicians basically say everything is fake news, some of them more than others. And they're sort of weaponizing. This is the second level misuse. So the fact that deepfakes exist now can be used to say that there is no such thing as true anymore. In fact, that very notorious Hollywood Access video, which nobody has been able to prove is fake at all. Nobody ever said it was fake. And yet the person involved in that said, oh, I think my voice is not me at all. It's exactly you and I see them. And in fact, I can tell you as somebody in AI, deepfake technology didn't exist in 2016 at that level to be able to do that. Okay, they were already able to say, no, that's not me. So you can basically, the alibis become a lot more right now. This is like a very interesting double play on the fact that lies can be told, can say that fakes exist, you can then say there is no such thing as objective reality, that everything is made up. So unfortunately, this is one of these things that's going to happen in the transition period until this whole thing is like some sort of cryptographically authenticated, and you can then say, then you won't have a leg to stand on. Although some people who don't at all believe in any kind of a science will say there is no such thing as cryptographic authentication, even that is, forged. But it's a very interesting point to say that people might very well use the existence of deep fakes to actually justify, to actually deny the scandalous and egregious things they did. It's already happened. We actually do see this even without AI technology in play, and it's going to increase a lot more. And that's a very interesting second order effect. That's what is your 21st
like that's question. How a lot of politicians that, any scandal that's come up about this technology, it seems like that's almost the first reaction to it. It's not like we don't really have any real attempts of malicious behavior by a state or a government to directly influence someone's perception with this technology. But they have used it to say, I didn't do that, this isn't real.
Yeah.
So it's almost the first thing, which is crazy. You wouldn't think about that. But the use of it as an excuse is almost more apparent now than...
I think so, because in fact, even without deep fakes, so the person obviously the most associated with it, our president, for example, doesn't necessarily probably even think about AI technology in the context of deep fakes. He considers all media to be fake media. Everything is fake. So if everything is fake, then only what I say is true, because the Lord has given me this human powers to be the arbiter of the truth. So that is a very interesting thing. The interesting question is the fact that that has become part of the discourse. This is not AI doing it. Again, in fact, most of the things, again, we always think of this as all technology is dual use. Intelligence is the ultimate technology, so intelligence is the ultimate dual use technology. So we will use it and we'll use any technology, we will misuse any technology. And people have figured out at some point of time that saying fake for everything will stick. Right? For if you say 10,000 times, this is fake, this is fake, this is fake, this is fake, and I run behind you, authenticating each of those stories, saying actually they're not fake, people still remember that there were 10,000 fakes were said. This is our irrationality again. And so essentially there is this is a much bigger issue. Deepfakes will feed into this, but it already existing ecosystem where this idea of trustworthy news sources is being actively and deliberately and with a concerted effort demolished. It's for the news sources, it's for the elections. Just keep saying that this is a fraudulent election, and after you say it, I show it is not, but people will remember that you said it. And that is, again, that's just us. That's human nature. And I think we humans have figured out the irrationality of the humans, and the entire advertisement technology, entire propaganda technology is essentially some of us trying to realize the problems that we all suffer from and weaponizing them. And deepfakes just feed into that. It's not that they made this as a problem, but it's very worrisome that we are in a milieu where we already believe that everything is, that it's considered okay to say, when shown evidence, it's considered okay to say fake, even without deepfakes existing. And then deepfakes will actually make more of them true, for example, because it may well be that people actually made this thing, and then that adds to the fire. And it thought of the big worry is trust in the civic organizations, trust in the societal organizations. So that is something that we need to worry about, honestly. So, yeah. And then I think the other ones I wrote yes in big letters for is, do you think deepfakes will be accessible to everyone in the way Photoshop is now? Yes, it is already. Adobe doesn't sell it. No reputable company sells a product like that. But on the other hand, this whole issue of reputable companies itself is going away, right? Anybody can put up, software that other people can use. There's like huge dark markets where passwords are being sold, software is being sold, that can be used and misused. And there's also some open source technology that basically is being put up. And so it's generally available. As that Zav app that I mentioned is like a classic case in point that shows that you can use this. Many people on the YouTube who make deepfakes and say they are deepfakes, that the Al Gore, Linda Carter thing, they basically just they're not PhD researchers in AI. They're just basically using existing technology. They're slightly tech savvy. That's about it. And that is so the bar is being reduced quite a bit. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think those are the other ones that I saw.
I think in a lot of ways we, in a roundabout kind of way, not directly asking the questions, we touched on most of this stuff, and great answers for all of them. So, I'm wondering. I guess so one like simple one, which we've already touched on, but just the direct answer is: do the benefits outweigh the risks when it comes to deepfakes in particular?
Again, synthetic reality on the whole, that basically it depends. Do benefits outweigh the risk? Depends on whether you are a spectator or whether you are an active participant in making sure that the benefits will be, that you will fight against the misuses and increase the benefits. Okay. So if you just leave it, if nobody plays any role, all of us are passive, most of us are passive observers, there is no societal dialogue about this, pushback about this, then it's much harder to tell whether benefits outweigh, whether benefits will outweigh risks, okay? But on the other hand, if you make it part of a civil discourse, I know that it's a very quaint thing to talk about civil discourse these days, but if you make it a part of a civil discourse, and if you basically deliberately think about impacts of this, there is very much, I remain very much of an optimist that we can do that. So in fact, one of the very interesting things is AI as a community, as I said, AI as a field existed for 60 years. For most of our time, and I've been working in AI for 30 years, and for most of that time, if we said we would like to talk about impacts of AI on society, nobody would be interested. You say you guys barely can make anything. I mean, why should we be worried? About you being an impact on society. So there were people talking about ethics of, use of AI technologies long before, but they didn't have much of an audience. Now, on the other hand, there are very vibrant, at least like academic, scholarly conferences and so on and so forth. So, for example, when I was the AAAI president, I was able to help start this a conference called AI Ethics and Society, with another computing organization, ACM and AAAI. And it's all about these questions, not just what are the technical specifications of the software, but should we be doing this? Under what conditions should we be doing this? In fact, that paper I mentioned to you about if AI systems can lie, how would people react to that? That was published in one of these AI Ethics and Society conferences. There is this other conference called FACT, Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency. Again, these are things that keep me optimistic, right? And essentially, democracy, as somebody said, democracy and open access and open dialogue is not easy, but I much rather take that than anything else, because all opinions will be expressed. And in fact, the fact that, for example, in the midst of the craziest time in our political life, there is like the most vigorous BLM movement is not something that you would have guessed. You would have thought, you wouldn't have necessarily thought in a Hitler's Nazi Germany there would be like a great renaissance of gay rights, for example. That wasn't possible then. It is much more possible now, because in some interesting sense, there are open channels for mobilizing for any kind of a view. It includes good as well as bad. And again, also part of it is we are all partisans. There's objective good, objective bad. There's also partisanal good and bad. All you can hope for is that there is the ability for people to be heard. And is at no point in the human civilization is that the ability higher than it is now, right? Everybody's voice can be heard. Honestly, that's like really true. And that is both a bane and a boon, right? Like in the sense, it's great that's the reason why, for example, some of these civil protests, for example, about BLM and about, civil rights and so on, are actually happening. So there's this one beautiful thing that I try to say in my talks. Many years back, when I was seeing this Eyes on the Prize, which is this PBS show on civil rights movement in US, there was this beautiful part where they show Martin Luther King saying that I'm going to use television. Okay, I'm going to use television to show to everyday American what is actually happening in Deep South. That is actually happening in some of these places. It was not understood by people that it was happening before. And so if I put it in your living room, and if you still are happy with it, nobody can help US. Nobody can help a country where that's the point of a democracy. If the entire electorate is indifferent to egregious forms of racism and sexism, nothing is going to change, which is why they didn't change for such a long time, right? But what he said is part of it is also because people don't see it on the, right in their face. And so he used the TV to make people realize this. And he said then if they don't like it, then they will at least join us in the fight. And he was right that in fact a lot of people, essentially it wasn't that they wanted this to continue. They had other things to think about. They were indifferent to it. But when they saw it in their in their living rooms, they couldn't ignore it. And I think of AI in that way, in a weird sense. AI can put a mirror to the society. Okay, we are sexist, we are racist, we are biased, we are all these things. We basically lie to each other. We misrepresent with no help from AI technology. But the fact that I'm able to show you how this works, and what are the impacts, essentially is like putting a mirror to the society. And that might make some people might basically, God forbid, somebody back in the 60s when they saw the civil rights and like police brutality or something, they might have learned, oh, this is the way to hit people with like batons. And those people can't be helped. But on the other side, there'll be other people who will say, this is not good for democracy. We should stand against it. It's the same thing that can happen with AI. With this mirror that's being put to the society, some people will decide, oh, this is the way we do misrepresentation. This is the way we do bias, etc. I can't help them. If they were there, they were just waiting. I mean, democracies won't survive with mostly people like that. No civil society can survive. But the people who sort of thought this stuff is not such a big deal, but basically they realize how much it is the case, they are likely to change their mind. They're likely to essentially change their mind in a real, in a positive way. And then that might be like a benefit in a weird sense.
Sounds like the solution is also the problem in a lot of ways, because it holds that mirror up, but then, what you are presenting might be manipulated or changed. So
yes, I mean, again, it's a complex thing. I mean, all of these are happening at the same time. My sense is, as I think, what was the Benjamin Franklin quote? Eternal vigilance is the price of freedom, and it's never more true than now. In essence, it's like you can't be just a passive participant. And if you do want a fully passive participant role, then eventually we need to believe in this kind of a matrix kind of reality where essentially we're all just out somewhere sort of, supporting the computers, human batteries sort of a thing. Or my other favorite movie, WALL-E, where again humans all just go up somewhere else and just hang around and the world is being taken by somebody else. If you want to be an active participant, then it would be, I think it's in a weird way, when there's more information, then there are more challenges. In the past, when nobody provided you any information, you could just say, I didn't know. But now it is there, and you chose not to use it. And so indifference is going to be bigger. It's going to be harder to defend. This current world. And it is indeed true that all these things can be at different levels. They can be, you can put good uses, misuses, good uses, misuses, good uses, misuses. Like we start talking about deepfakes. We talked about how synthetic reality can be generated. We talked about how mind twins can be done from that. We talked about how, for example, New York Times documentary essentially used known deepfakes to tell a story that makes a more emotional contact to us of this Chechnya, gay rights activists, for example, right? And so they were, and then we also talked about how to kind of, some people using existence of deepfakes to say that everything is a deepfake, everything is a fake. So this is going to be, it's like, it's going to be an arms race. But everything important in human civilization has been an arms race, I think. It's always been, a fight for ideas between engaged people. And that's just the way it is going to be. And that's just, of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that regulation has no place. Of course, regulation has place. There are lots of interesting things that can be done. And people were asleep at the steering wheel in letting Facebook do what it was doing, for example. And the sad part is some people probably knew that they were doing crazy nonsense and yet they let it happen. Some people probably didn't even realize. There are obvious ways you can regulate there. But again, regulation is not the only answer, because if you regulate Facebook in the US, what happens in Facebook in some other country? Or what happens in a competing Facebook? What happens in a North Korean version of the Facebook? Whoever. I have nothing against North Korea. It's just that everybody has some boogeyman country that they think are their enemies. And so, what happens there? It's like, it's basically, it's going to be this arms race. And you will need to kind of defend against misuses while working for positive uses, right? And I think that's partly, in some sense, that's actually, again, this thing that I'm involved in, this AI Foundation, is actually a startup. But one of the nice things that I like about them is they took into account the fact that you can't make profit without also worrying about impacts from the day one. So it's like we could easily say we are a synthetic reality company. We'll just do mind twins. Nobody can accuse us of it. But they were mostly interested in saying, well, we will do that, but we also know other people will misuse it. Other kinds of things. So let's play both of them. However, sort of idealistic it might look, if everybody does that, and to some extent, people have started doing that. Facebook, for example, has defend democracy suddenly, all of a sudden, and Twitter certainly has been playing in, things are working. So that's ultimately what's going to happen. You will be doing like a societal, something like that you have to do as a dutiful citizen of a democracy. In addition to just making money, using this technology for good uses. And that, as to where it will end up, I tend to be an optimist. But just because an optimist doesn't necessarily mean that the progress of good will only be just nice and slow. It might go like this and then start going. So we don't know. So yeah. Okay.
I think we.
Sorry.
No, it's just so much. Like everything's a contradiction at the same time. You know what I mean? Like it's great. It's horrible implications. Like everything is black and white. I guess that's true for more than just.
No, I think so. In fact, I think part of growing up is realizing that there's nothing black and white in the world. Nothing is pure good versus pure evil. It's just again. That's just the way. In fact, connecting that to this, what Elie Wiesel says, that all that is needed for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. Indifference is really the biggest worry, as against people purely goody two shoes versus purely we're out to get the world. What is happening to the middle, and are they engaged? That's going to be important thing. It's never going to be just every technology can be misused, and so
it's up to everybody.
It, to some extent, very much so. I think that's just the way it is going to be. I mean, in fact, it's like not surprising. I mean, you can't. Yeah, I mean, we are not talking about bias. We talked about fakes, but one of the other hot button issues about AI is these AI systems and bias. That AI systems tend to have biases, but guess what? They learned it from you and me, right? Right? It's not that they learned a new reality. They looked at you and me. So, I mean, my classic example is, if you go to Google, image search, and type the word professor, and see the pictures that you see, you don't see 50 women and 50 men. You see 80 balding, middle-aged white men, and a sprinkling of, other people, women, minorities, other people of colored people, and so on and so forth. Now, now basically, if your machine learning system is being trained on that data, you shouldn't be surprised at all that it's going to pick up that, when you hear a professor, they must be balding middle-aged men. In fact, this has happened across the board. I mean, this is a completely different issue altogether, but Gmail would automatically complete sentences in a male gender. If you say, the investor came to see me, and then Gmail will say he was wearing, or he said. So investor must be a he. There's this old story about you may have heard of that, this man and his son were going on a drive, and then they tried to cross a level crossing, and then the train came barreling through and hit their car, and the man died on the scene. The kid is taken to the hospital, and they took him to the emergency surgery. And the surgeon comes and says, "Oh no, I can't operate on him. He's my kid." And at one point of time, interestingly, a lot of people, this was seen as a paradox. In the sense, some people will be taken aback because they have never actually seen surgeons who are not male. And so the quote unquote paradox is, how can there be two fathers for the same kid? As do you see what I'm saying? So that's basically what Google was saying. All the investors you seem to be talking about are male. So what's wrong with me and saying he? Okay. And all professors seem to be male and white. And so why not just make another professor saying? So it's a these are basically representations of us. These systems are learning from us, and so to some extent, getting a good AI involves having a good society. Right? Because I actually do not want to be in a world where all our AI systems are non-racist and non-sexist, but we are all racist and sexist. That makes no sense to me, because in some sense it's a failure of learning, right? Right? So yeah, it's a whole entire story. But yeah, I think coming back to your thing, yes, we have to be actively engaged. I think it's more so for bias aspects, but it's also true for fake news aspects. We need to be more skeptical. We need to actually care about truth. When we don't care about truth, how does it matter? And in fact, that is part of the thing. Without AI being even a part of this, we have already seen that in politics, truth is becoming less and less important already. I mean, not everybody who, for example, saw some of those notorious Hollywood access tape, etc., thought they were actual fakes, but they said, so what? So it just, when the truth doesn't matter, then when we decide it doesn't matter, then it's going to be an interesting question.
Do you have an idea of what happens to a society when truth is no longer valued?
It's a very good question. I think to some extent we are living in such societies already. I think we all have some ideas about that. It is interesting, sometimes, I have this t-shirt which basically says, science doesn't care what you believe in. And it turns out neither does coronavirus. In some sense, certain things can be mentally manipulated, certain things cannot be wished away. And maybe when you pay for truth not mattering, society will come a little bit more to its senses. But that's again the optimist in me, saying it. Like, for example, the entire anti-vaccinated, anti-vaxxers, etc. When they actually follow, you've seen so many of these stories. Many people saying that coronavirus is not a thing; it's just made up fiction, until they get it. Then, oh my God, I found Jesus already. It's like, what stopped you from finding Jesus? Everybody was telling you the science. You chose not to. And, and so it's again, to some extent, objective truth. It's not all of the things. Objective truth sometimes has a way of getting its way, because it's indifferent to whether you believe it or not. Right? If I don't believe gravity exists, it's not that the universe is going to sort of say, oh, this guy doesn't believe gravity exists, so this thing that is falling, as in those Looney Tunes cartoons, the thing that is falling is no longer going to fall because this guy doesn't, exist. So that there is that effect. But there's also a lot of, we're going back to both of these. So one of this is this, the other is much of human civilization is not about fact at all. It is about shared imaginations. What is religion? What is law? What is government? What is any of these things? It's just, as Yuval Noah Harari pushes that point. And those can be manipulated. That would be very interesting. The only thing then might be that because everybody can misuse this technology almost as effectively, my sense is that there may be 10,000 or a million, we are the true X sects. And so that sort of reduces the thing. So in fact, I'm thinking of this Simpsons episode where Simpsons go to Jerusalem, and there is this thing about Messiah complex. Some people suddenly, when they go to the Wailing Wall or go to Jerusalem, they start feeling like they are the Messiah too. And then, so suddenly Homer starts feeling like a Messiah, and he starts talking, this is the true religion, which looks very worrisome to you. Until then the camera pans, there are like 1,500 other Messiahs standing at the same time. Right? So that might be what will happen. So it's like if everybody is misusing it, then it's like, again, I think decentralization is very important. Honestly, the biggest worry I have is these technologies combined with totalitarian regimes. Okay, I mean, in fact, I was talking about it to somebody, I was reading about this too, that, at the dawn of internet, I thought this is going to be the death knell of all authoritarian countries, because they used to control the means of information. Now they can't control it because everybody can get onto the internet, etc., etc. So I was very much sure that authoritarianism and totalitarianism is going to be on the way down. Okay, and yet I was wrong. Essentially, there's a great firewall, and and not only some countries have already, like China has a great firewall. US is considering variations of great firewall, which is like very unsettling thing. That to me is much more worrisome, because if it is centralized, the damage can be much higher. If it is decentralized, you are better off to some extent, because instead of two dueling messiahs, I would much rather have 10,000 dueling fake messiahs, because then most people will basically A, just ignore all of them, or B, like the damage any of them can cause would be reduced quite significantly. So that is, it's these, all of what we have talked about combined with authoritarianism, totalitarianism, which has again nothing to do with technology, which is just us, okay, and us finding how to misuse technology to continue to, clean this thing, is the thing that I'm really worried about. I mean, as bad as many people think about the current state of affairs in democracies, like including US, at least there are multiple news sources. You can, if you want to be a responsible, deliberate citizen, you can figure out which source has higher trustworthiness, and you can pay attention to it. If you're stuck in a place where there's only Radio Pravda or TASS News Agency or something, you have no such ability, right? So to me, I think that decentralization is the Fahrenheit 451. Again, essentially, as long as we have the ability. So that's why, I am worried about these knee-jerk reactions to legislate things away. I mean, it's like I'm actually, it's one of these very strange situations. So it's almost like the strange nonsense that NRA spouts, that when, guns are outlawed, only outlaws will have guns. Except guns have a moat. You can actually stop people from getting guns. You can stop people from getting nuclear weapons. We have done this. Other countries have done this. You cannot stop. Whereas on the other hand, when you control internet, that's a very different situation. Okay. So I'm much more worried about banning things. I'm much more worried about, beautifying things. Because as long as I have a fair shake, and the fact that the AI technology is democratic, and the fact that the internet is open right now, thanks to government not yet changing that rule, to me is actually a big positive sign. Because there are bad guys, but there are good guys. And it's always been that way. It's always been, it's just issue. So if you don't even have that, then, then we are in big trouble, essentially.
Yeah, so. That's such an interesting thing, because, I feel like coming from the West or the US, or a place where democracy and freedom is very, relatively free, I guess. You kind of forget that, like, a technology like this, it gives everyone kind of a louder microphone, so everyone has their own, and then it's just like annoying because it's a bunch of white.
Exactly, guys. It's what I'm saying. It's like yeah.
But on the flip side, on a totalitarian side, it's like that one megaphone that they had.
Exactly, that's exactly what I'm saying. Now. So it's like if Homer is the only messiah, I'm very worried. If Homer is one of 1,500 messiahs with Messiah's complex, I'm not worried. Right? Everybody will have two people listening to them. It's okay, right? I mean, it's annoying, but it's not going to be a major danger. So, honestly, I'm much more worried about all these issues in China than I am about these issues in India or US. You know, argumentative, chaotic democracies, I'm okay with them because they have both sides have access to the technology as well as to the ability to get their uh, ideas across. So again, every once in a while, you'd feel like, why can't I be in a society where people, anti-vaxxers, will be put in a jail? And then I'll hit myself on the back of my head and say, no, I don't want to be in that society because if there is like a central authority, one day it is anti-vaxxers, the other day it will be people who actually believe in that science has uses, for example, and anything can be decided by one single organization, and we don't want to be in that situation. And yeah, I think it's just it may be it's only it's like the downside, as I think it was Churchill or somebody who said this, that it's not that the democracy is the most effective system. It is the system with the least cataclysmic downside. That ultimately, there's these beautiful things like Amartya Sen, for example, talks about famines don't happen in democracies. Famines used to happen in authoritarian regimes. I mean, China, for example, in the Cultural Revolution, Mao basically just said, he had huge numbers of people dying in villages, for example. In India, under British rule, Bengal famine is a classic case in point where essentially the government didn't care, and the government was not a democracy because it was a colony. It's a colonizer. Once a country becomes democratic, it doesn't happen that way, because when people get to speak, then there would be a pushback. And that will reduce the cataclysmic downside. And then we, of course, will then say, oh my God, all these totalitarian regimes are all standing on one line and getting in one way. But that's not what we are trying to optimize with democracies. We are trying to optimize the downside. And if you think in that way, and in the case of deepfakes, it's all about downsides. And if you want to make sure that the impact of the downsides is mitigated, I'm much happier to be in democracies where everything is open than in totalitarian countries where some single organization or dictator decides this, because one day they will be on my side, the other day they will be on a different side, and you're screwed at that point.
And then it's also, even that is still a little bit scary, because it's not like both of those things are operating in a vacuum. Like there will be, if it progresses, there will be a China with that much more control over their people, and a U.S. that is that much more fractured and splinterized. So then, in a weird way, it sounds like China, even though it's worse for the people, they kind of have the upper hand, because they're
right now. Again, it's not obvious. I think it's right now. It looks like that way. I mean, as I said, I'm one of the people who assumed that general totalitarian authoritarian regimes will be going away. On the whole, forget about China. Even US, Hungary, all these things are becoming more and more authoritarian. Well, thank God we are not China. But and certainly some people in power in US wish that they had a lot more power of the kind some dictators have. This is what I'm saying. So we are going through that phase, but I still tend to think that, it may be like this, but the longer term trajectory is still essentially more positive for the democratic side, because essentially there can be a cataclysmic downside for some society where somebody thinks they know all the answers and there is no civil discourse. And up until then, it's like traders in a stock market doing nonsensical trades, and there might be like a $3 billion in their account today, but then tomorrow they have negative $3 million. And when they're $3 billion, you feel envious of them. But then next day, if you don't minimize the downside, then there can be that problem too.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's really cool. And then still, like, we would be so busy fighting with each other that if they have a streamline on it, it seems like we're vulnerable to them if they have.
Again, I think it's a question of short term versus long term. Certainly, these are some concerns that you need to worry about. Of course, we are also much farther away from the deep fakes issue, however. But I mean, I think it's interesting that even in these cases, my sense is the it's like you long-term trajectory versus short-term fluctuations. We tend to, if we look at the short-term fluctuations, we tend to make wrong moves on the whole sometimes. And so I tend, again, maybe it's the optimist in me speaking, but I think the fact that certain kinds of totalitarian, in general in the world, totalitarianism seems to be going up a little bit more. On the whole, even if it is not like it's not 0 and 1, it is some fractions in between, but the fractions are increasing. That looks worrisome, but my sense is, again, many of these other issues will come into play because a lot of the current world depends on interdependence of all sorts of cases, and so there will be ways for information to travel, even with the quote unquote great firewalls. I mean, it's not like Chinese, I have been to China multiple times. It's not like you can't actually reach Facebook. It's not like you can't reach Gmail. It's not like you can't reach Wikipedia. VPNs exist, and it's a cat and mouse game. And in fact, somebody did this very interesting study that the people who keep, kind of stopping these holes, etc., there's like a huge paid army of people who try to stop these things, but they prioritize it in terms of things that matter to them. They don't care about the fact that you're using Facebook once in a while. They care about whether you're using Facebook to start some demonstration in Tiananmen Square. That's what they care about. And any of those will be removed much faster. It's the same with, they have a Weibo, which is their Twitter. And mostly, in fact, my students told me that even at the height of coronavirus, you would actually get unfiltered, noisy truth on the Weibo, but for 24 hours. And then every 24 hours it gets this thing. So people knew what was going on. And again, that's the adaptivity winds up mattering, essentially. Yeah. That's good.
Really good. So many doors open from this one conversation. It was great stuff. So I really appreciate you taking the time to go on such a far-reaching conversation with this. I think we covered a lot of really great stuff that will be really useful in talking about this. So.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
So if I don't know whether it's possible for you, but I would be interested just for my private use, since I had this conversation. If when you get the Zoom recording, if you can give me a link, I won't put it anywhere, just for my personal use. And you have I think basically everything I said, you have my permission to use. If I'm obviously sure that only little pieces can ever be used, but I'm interested in looking at the things, because sometimes I'm a teacher, I tend to think when I'm talking. So so I would be interested in getting when you get the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I'll send it over.
Okay, good. Good luck with your project, and I look forward to seeing it at some point. Thank you.
I will keep you posted on our progress.
Okay, good. Thanks.
Have a good day.
Bye.